Have you ever imagined a life where someone works for you, exercises for you, and even makes money for you? That was the situation in our protagonist Sangu's past, where his substitutes did such, and it was as if a dream had come true. But now, he pushes those memories aside, standing amidst a devastated area with a group of others. The landscape around them is ravaged, and hordes of monsters are wreaking havoc, tearing the place apart. Despite the destruction, Sangu hasn't given up. He continues to fight the monsters, commanding his companions to collect the corpses of the fallen creatures. It's ironic, he muses, that he once worked so hard for a comfortable life, yet here he is, fighting tooth and nail to survive. But everyone in this world has to struggle in their own way. Suddenly, a massive monster looms before him, roaring fiercely in an attempt to intimidate. But the Sangu stands firm, unfazed. He isn't scared, because he isn't alone. With a calm but determined voice, he orders his team to attack. They charge at the beast with precision and strength. Sangu smiles inwardly, knowing he's never truly alone in battle. His unique skill, the ability to clone himself, allows him to create multiple copies of himself, each one ready to join the fight against the monsters. Together, they launch a coordinated attack, determined to reclaim their world from the clutches of these fearsome creatures. Sangu thought that he had to work, study, and eat. He also mentioned that he wanted to try many things, like playing games, traveling to different places, partying with friends, and going on dates. Because of these thoughts, he often wondered why people couldn't have more than one body. To explore this idea, he summoned a man who looked just like him. He then visited a city market where everyone was busy with their own lives. Two people were chatting, with one saying he might get a new skill as he was awakened. Second one replied that the first one could use the skill which could increase his intellect. A fatty boy mumbled to himself that he was tired and should go home. Sang Woo-jong from Jungkook University sighed, wishing he had two bodies. An announcer called for everyone's attention. He introduced himself as a class hunter, Park Won-tae, and said he would be in charge of the 10th Portal Awakening program. This government-run program was designed to help people awaken their unique skills by exposing them to mana through a portal. Hunter Park Won hoped the townsfolk would awaken safely and called the first group to step forward. Sangwoo was among them and began to feel nervous as his turn approached. A woman confirmed his identity and asked if he was Group 37, Number 7, Mr. Sangwoo. He confirmed that he was the person she was looking for. She verified his identity by scanning his bracelet and then told him to hand over all his gadgets and step into the portal. Sangwoo approached the portal, feeling unsure, but he closed his eyes and stepped through. The portal confirmed his identity as coming from Earth under the name Sangwoo. It granted him use authorization and completed his registration. He felt dizzy and his head pounded as he opened his eyes. He put his hand on his head and looked around. He found himself in a place with several drones and people who had also awakened with their own skills. He wonders if this was a bunker. Some people seemed unwell. A girl was excitedly shouting that she had an amazing ability to create a phoenix made of fire. Members of different guilds surrounded her. One man introduced himself as being from the Hell Guild, and another woman from the Donggon Guild invited her to join their guild. Sangwoo envied the guilds. A man stepped forward and congratulated him on his awakening, asking if he was okay. Sangwoo admitted he wasn't feeling great, but the man assured him he'd feel better soon. He then asked Sangwoo if he had seen his unique skill yet. A screen floating in front of Sangwoo showed his status. It said he was at a low level, but had gained a clone and clone-enhancing skill. He couldn't believe it. The skill had appeared just as he had been thinking about it. His reflexes and health were rated low, and his endurance was also lacking. He felt disappointed, but tried to focus on the fact that the skill was important. The cloning skill detail revealed that he could create clones from energy without any special conditions. He was amazed but remained speechless. The man told him that most people had similar starting stats and encouraged him to cheer up. He asked what Sangwoo's special skill was, and Sangwoo replied it was cloning. The man seemed disappointed, mentioning that some people had illusion-based cloning skills, which weren't very useful since illusions couldn't do anything physically. Sangwoo thought his skill was different because it wasn't an illusion. The man said it was always better to have a skill than to wake up with none. He suggested showing Sangwoo's skill to the officials for a fairer assessment. One person with an ability demonstrated it under pressure, even though he seemed reluctant. Sangwoo asked the man about the door. The man said Sangwoo would need to scout and register everything before he could return through the gateway. The man then called the next person in line to come into the room. Sangwoo walked in, feeling a bit nervous about the results. He was greeted by a scientist who checked his ability to clone. The scientist told Sangwoo that he had a 73% chance of having one or more skills, and added that the skills verification was complete. The scientist quickly wrote down cloning and updated Sangwoo's identification bracelet. As Sangwoo left, he noticed how quickly everything was moving compared to what he had imagined. He wondered about the nature of his cloning skill. When he got home and entered his room, he checked to see if his clones were working. Sure enough, his monitor showed a game in progress. He sat down in his chair, checked the game's progress, and reflected on his belongings, thinking they were just clutter. He lay down on his bed, contemplating trying a different game since the current one seemed to be losing popularity. He remembered he needed to pay off his tuition and rent, but was too lazy to get a job. He wished someone else could take his place at work. Then he remembered his special cloning skill. Looking at his bracelet, he decided to test it out. He went to a part of his room with enough space for his clone. Sangu gathered energy around his body, and it started to take shape. The energy began to split, forming a ball of light. Smoke cleared to reveal a hand and a foot. Sangu had just summoned a clone of himself and was amazed by the result. He opened his eyes and saw his clone. The clone's body and legs were exactly the same as his own. Surprisingly, Sangu wanted to see if the clone was really real. He asked if it truly existed, and the clone confirmed that it did. When he asked if he could touch it, the clone answered yes and called him Master. Feeling a bit awkward, Sangu gave himself a slap and then touched the clone's shoulder, squeezing it. Since he could physically touch the clone, he realized it was a real body, not just an illusion. He looked at the naked clone and decided to dress it. After tossing some clothes to the clone, he curiously asked if he just needed to give an order. The clone confirmed that this was all that was needed. Sangu figured he had to command the clone on what to do. To his surprise, it followed his instructions instantly. He found out he didn't even need to speak out loud. He could just use his mind. He had the clone stand up and repeat its actions. After a while, the clone got tired from constantly sitting and standing. Sangu noticed that the clone had the same stamina as he did. A beep from his pocket caught his attention. It was a text from Gyeongdo, bragging about his 2 hunter skills and asking about Sangu's skill. While typing a response, Sangu watched the clone continue its repetitive motions. He replied that he had indeed acquired a skill. The other person congratulated him but also mocked him. The chatty replies irritated Sangu. A status window appeared in front of him, showing that his stamina had increased slightly. He was puzzled by this. Meanwhile, in another country, George Lucas, an S-class ranker from America and head of the Enlightened Group, was sitting in his main office. His assistant informed him that out of 300 million people, 80% had awakened their skills. George Lucas asked how long it would take to reach 100%. His calculations suggested it would take around 5 years, but George Lucas, who was deep in thought with an open window, didn't seem worried about the time. Back to Sangu's clone, it was now running endlessly in a park. The clone didn't stop and was getting very exhausted. People in the park recognized him and watched, wondering if he was going to faint. An elderly lady handed him a bottle of water to drink before he continued running. The clone remained quiet, and then suddenly resumed running. The lady muttered to herself that he might be an introvert. The clone stepped on a scale and noticed he had lost weight. His body had become lean, and he was getting hungry all the time. He now ate double what he used to, and had lost 20 pounds in a month. He looked better physically each day, and had even grown a little taller. His stats, like stamina, endurance, and reflexes, had improved a bit. He also realized that all the powers he had gained were related to his inner desires. He understood a few things about clones. They didn't bother him with their pain or exhaustion. When they were damaged or used up too much energy, they disappeared. Clones were updated instantly with him, and he could order them simply by thinking, even from far away. However, they couldn't use their cloning skill on their own, as that would be ineffective. Sangu searched the internet for information about hunters. It turned out to be just as he expected. He found out about normal and special stats. Most people who had awakened only had some of the normal stats. Special stats like regeneration, resistance, and vitality were harder to unlock, except in a few cases. He had confirmed that his own stats had increased significantly since the start of his training. This was clear because his clone had continuously trained and followed every order to its limits. Sangu knew that if he trained with his clone, his stats would likely improve even more. Let me know if you need any more changes. He read one that spoke about a gym and its routines promising stat improvements if he went. Still looking at that flyer, he was playing a game on his computer. He had already devised his plan. He'd be the brains and his clones were going to be the brawn. Sangu went over his finances and realized he didn't have enough money for registration. He sighed, knowing that a lot of his cash had been spent on food. He decided he needed a part-time job to earn some extra money for registration. He started looking for job opportunities on his computer, focusing on jobs that involved physical labor so he could practice and make money at the same time. He found a job listing for a logistics position on a site with thousands of offers. The job involved delivering or dropping off packages. The company, called Wukong Logistics Center, was looking for part-time employees. Sangu thought this would be a good fit and called the company. He mentioned seeing the job listing on the company's website and asked if the position was still available. The employer confirmed it and said there wouldn't be an interview. Sangu could start working immediately. When asked when he was available, Sangu said he could start the next day, but wondered if he could begin the same day. The employer invited him to come by the logistics center, thanked him, and encouraged him to meet face-to-face soon. Sangu arrived at the logistics center with his clone, whom he called Number 1. The place was filled with trucks, so he felt he was in the right spot. He was about to explain that they were twins, but he decided it might be better to say they were friends instead. He scratched his head, looking around and noting how much bigger the place was than he had expected. He wondered where he needed to go. A man approached and asked if he was Sangu. He introduced himself as Mr. Deokchiol and greeted Sangu. He mentioned that he had lost many employees and thanked Sanggu for coming. He directed Sanggu to a certain area and then left. Feeling jittery, Sanggu asked number 1 if he was nervous too. Number 1 replied no and seemed confident, as if he was starting to wake up as well. Sanggu decided he needed to get the job done quickly so he could go home and enjoy some ramen. He noticed that many people at the center were busy moving and organizing packages. He figured the employees probably had skills to help them handle the heavy lifting. Mr. Deokiel worked alongside number 1, and Sanggu thought maybe he didn't need to be there since number 1 seemed to be managing well on his own. At lunchtime, Sanggu was very tired, and number 1 kept watch over him. Mr. Deokiel handed Sanggu a can of soda and some food, saying he should take a break since he was sweating a lot. Sanggu thanked him. Mr. Deokiel sat with them and remarked on how number 1 worked silently. He asked for the clone's name, and Sanggu replied that it was Gyeongdo Kim. Mr. Deokiel said his own name was Manly. He then asked Sanggu if it was okay since it was his first time working in that kind of industry. Sanggu admitted it was a new experience and quite tiring. Mr. Deokiel complimented both Sanggu and number 1 for their hard work. He mentioned that most workers took breaks, but Sanggu thought about his empty bank account. Sanggu inquired about Mr. Deokiel's university background, and Mr. Deokiel said he graduated from Gyeongguk University. Sanggu noted that it was a nice university, and Mr. Deokiel assumed Sanggu must have been hard-working there. Number 1 was drinking a cola as Sanggu explained that Gyeongguk University wasn't as prestigious as it might seem. Mr. Deokiel insisted that Sanggu shouldn't be modest and said that if his daughter could get into that university, he would be very pleased. He himself had ended up at Gyeongguk GCK University, despite not being good at studying. Mr. Deokiel asked if Sanggu had used special admissions or licenses to get into the university. Sanggu confirmed that he had. Mr. Deokiel was pleased with the news of special admission and felt that his daughter could also benefit from it. He then asked if Sanggu would be interested in taking up another part-time job. Curious about the new job, Sanggu was offered the opportunity to tutor Mr. Deokiel's daughter instead of working at the center. Mr. Deokiel proposed a rate of 50,000 won for every 2 hours, once or twice a week. Sanggu considered the offer and decided that teaching at that rate wasn't a bad deal. He agreed to tutor Mr. Deokiel's daughter. Mr. Deokiel thanked him and said he would discuss it with his daughter and contact Sanggu soon. He asked if Sanggu still had the old phone number, and Sanggu confirmed he did. Sanggu hoped the tutoring job would go well. Suddenly, a status window popped up, showing a small increase in both his stamina and endurance. He was pleased with the job and the boost in his stats. As one laborer delivered a balance, Sanggu realized there were more delivery orders to handle. Normally, the company trained its laborers to eat before starting any work, but Sanggu felt this was a mistake. Without any additional deliveries in his bag, he looked at number 1 who was eating, and awkwardly cursed him for eating all the food. Sanggu lay on his bed, still aching from the previous day's work. He complained about the pain and sent number 1 off to his part-time job. A status window popped up, showing that his endurance had increased a little, which meant number 1 had worked hard. Sanggu told number 1 to go home, curious to see if his clone's clothes would stay behind. After that, Sanggu thought about breakfast and felt satisfied after eating. As he finished, he noticed someone approaching his apartment. It was number 1, looking dirty. Sanggu told him to clean up and change into fresh clothes. After a shower and new clothes, number 1 presented himself to Sanggu. Sanggu asked him to show his hand, and number 1 did so. Feeling a bit nervous but determined, Sanggu used a needle to prick number 1's finger, making a small wound. Number 1 didn't flinch or show any sign of pain. Sanggu wiped away the blood and remarked on how well number 1 had handled it. He hoped that inflicting and healing wounds might help unlock the regeneration stat, as mentioned in the Hunter Wiki. He thought that doing this over a month might trigger the stat. Worried that the wounds might be too large, Sanggu decided to make them small and frequent. He instructed number 1 to eat ramen whenever he could, and to train hard. Sanggu gave number 1 a spare phone and asked him to answer it if he went out to work. As Sanggu left the building, he asked people around him for directions to the gym. He was tapped on the shoulder and heard someone call his name. He turned to see Kim Gyeongdo, who remarked that it had been a while. Gyeongdo noted that Sanggu looked thin, but remarked that it suited him. Sanggu replied that he had just finished working out and was heading to the gym. Gyeongdo said he was going to the gym too and bragged about how many kilograms he had lost. Gyeongdo mentioned that his gym was excellent. Sanggu asked if it was really special, given the high price. Gyeongdo admitted he was interested in a pretty trainer who was attending to someone's stretch at the gym. He invited Sanggu to join him, and Sanggu agreed, knowing that Gyeongdo was likely more interested in the trainer than the workout. They entered the gym, which was packed with people lifting weights. A man who was having lunch but stood up to greet them explained that the gym was called Tough Body Gym, and mentioned a special, 3 months for 160,000 won. Sanggu decided to sign up for 3 months and asked if he could check his posture on each machine since number 1 would be working out for him. The man agreed and processed his payment. Sanggu started using the exercise machines. He mentioned needing extra effort to align the bench press. A loud crash startled them. It was Gyeongdo dropping a weight. The man at the gym was impressed by Gyeongdo's strength, but Gyeongdo said it was his first time working out. Sang-gu asked Gyeongdo if he had become stronger since awakening and inquired about his strength stat. Gyeongdo said it was about 2 points and added that with a higher strength stat, one could handle heavier weights. Sang-gu realized that Gyeongdo must have some special skill and wondered how powerful high-profile hunters were. Sang-gu's phone rang and he answered it. Mr. Deokyeol called to check if Sang-gu had made it home safely the previous day and mentioned discussing with his wife and daughter if Sang-gu was available. Sang-gu confirmed his availability. Mr. Deokyeol then asked if Sang-gu could meet him at his residence. Sang-gu agreed and headed to the address provided by Mr. Deokyeol. As Sang-gu approached the apartment complex, he thought about how Gyeongdo hadn't registered at the gym after using the equipment. Gyeongdo had said he wasn't going to because he didn't like the trainer. Sang-gu figured this was for the best, as it meant he wouldn't have any trouble sending number 1 to the gym. When Sang-gu opened the door to Mr. Deokyeol's apartment, he heard raised voices inside. Someone was complaining that Dad was making decisions without consulting them and demanded he cancel the appointment with a tutor. As the door swung open, it hit Sang-gu in the face. The person inside said they would work it out and needed to speak to Sang-gu directly if she didn't like the tutor. Mr. Deokyeol's eyes widened at the sight of Sang-gu being hit by the door, and the girl in the corridor looked at Sang-gu with surprise. Sang-gu scratched his head as he looked up at somebody, then Mr. Deokyeol apologized since he had not known him for who he was. Sang-gu said it was all right. A plate of sliced apples was brought by a woman who asked if he truly was the student called Sang-gu, for she could not recognize him since he had lost so much weight. Sang-gu replied that he had been doing a lot of workouts, but it was quite a while since he had seen her. He then asked her if she was Haeon in not so sure voice. She replied she was. Sang-gu introduced himself as Sang-gu and informed her that from that day going on, he would be her tutor. He told him he had heard her father say she was trying to go to Gyeongguk University. Mr. Deokyeol and his wife started to taunt their daughter and her outbursts of rebellion. Haeon flustered, thinking Sang-gu must have overheard her earlier shouting. Sang-gu asked if she was in grade 12 and she wanted the grades checked before they got started. Haeon was surprised by the request, while Sang-gu was frustrated as she saw her grades below average. She covered her face in shame while her family kept on teasing. Mr. Deokyeol grabbed his jacket and ran to work while thanking Sang-gu. His wife labeled him a traitor. Sang-gu faced Haeon, whose face had dropped. He reassured her that it was okay as he had given the scores poorly too, the first time. Things lightened up as Haeon asked him if he was joking around. Sang-gu reassured her that it was correct and added that to try their best. She agreed, and Sang-gu went ahead to explain to them what schedule they were to use to teach her. He then left the house of Mr. Deokyeol and thought for a few moments of how long a stretch lay before him. Sang-gu taught M with all patience during the session. She learned eagerly, and he hung his clothes to dry, thinking that it was good she was brighter than what he had anticipated. He figured number 1 must have gone to work and began to consider the problem of multiple phones in case his clones increased in numbers. Sang-gu looked at his computer thinking to search for something on the Hunter web dealing with skill. He saw some on sale and one of them he had seen before, a skill he knew. The price even made him sprinkle his water 100 million won. Then a view of a telepathy skill scroll, that would be 400 million won. He thought it better to buy a house rather than a skill, and leaned back in his chair, feeling it would take forever to afford even one skill. He wondered if hunters earned so much that they could afford such expensive skills. He viewed the balance on his phone. He then remembered how he had become a hunter himself. The boy then scrolled his phone to read some news about the hunters of apartments in Korea. Feeling that his skill is great and shouldn't be used in minor jobs, Sang-gu grasped his jacket to try being a hunter. He was overconfident and elated. His phone beeped, and a status window popped up. He had unlocked the required skill to become a hunter. What could a hunter even be in this time so far ahead of him? He wondered. How had Sang-gu known, in but a moment, portals had sprung up across the world, and monsters had poured forth from them, invoking the horrors of the great disaster that washed away more than half of mankind? Then followed the superhumans, with powers beyond imagination, to save the day victory for mankind in that single war. And now the hunters were hunting the monsters left behind. Sang-gu watched a video on tips regarding how to be a hunter. He was assured that, should one pass the test, he would be given a license to legitimately kill monsters and be recognized nationally. Sang-gu plugged in his earphones. The video was giving tips for passing the hunter test. He walked to the very tall building that surprised him, considering it bellowed with people the Hunter Center. People in the Hunter Center were grabbing up weapons and making them usable with relatively inexpensive parts. There were a handful of people in line at the lobby, but he could also tell that not many people were really testing today. He figured it must be the vitality skill he had just gained that was making him feel a whole lot better, even with a few hours of sleep. One of the women announced that registration for the Hunter license test, being conducted on floor 1 of the basement, would close in 20 minutes. The announcement got Sang-gu a little nervous about what was going to happen in the basement. He opened the testing room door and exclaimed, "Excuse me." All those people turned their faces toward me. He felt nervous, looking at the huge number of candidates present over there. Some of them teased him on how he entered. Then a man in a soldier's uniform came. His introduction follows. His name is Han Mangan, Class C Hunter, and he is the proctor for the test. Mangan explained that it would actually be composed of 3 things: a written test, a practical test, and an aptitude test. He then added that if the 2 were caught cheating, the cheater would automatically fail, plus, on top of that, would not get another chance at it that same year. The atmosphere tightened up. They never let cheaters get away. There was a man driving down the street who assured the person at the other end of the line that he would deposit the entire money before the end of the month. He asked the boss to wait, saying that he hadn't been working in that particular field for just a couple of days. The person at the other end of the line got angry and yelled, thereby hurting his ear. He complained that the person was killing him. The CEO of the JM agency, Junmo Kang, was worried. He knew money wasn't coming in, and a lot of places the money had to go. Junmo looked at his watch. It was just about time the hunter examination would come to an end. He kept driving along the highway. Congratulatory messages of passing the F-class hunter examination popped up on a window of Sangu's bracelet at that very moment. He stood mute, scratching at his head, for it was an idea he really had that everybody said it was easy, but how much easy did they mean? Then he was surprised to find that it really was about like getting a driver's license. An easily passed written examination, a practical test with a near target that was straightforward, an aptitude test that rather felt like some kind of moral test from grade school. What all this meant was hard to believe the hunter exam had been easy, what with lives and weapons at risk, but he shrugged it off. Inside the hunter center, people in suits handed calling cards to the new hunters, trying to recruit them. Maybe from guilds, Sangu thought as one of them approached him, congratulated him on passing his exam, and handed him a card with a number on it. The card was for the JM agency, and their CEO was Junmo. Introducing himself, he boasted that he could do the most work in buying items or hunting monsters for the smallest cost. The clone skill notification suddenly popped up. It now showed that the skill is level 2, which would allow him to make a second clone. Junmo still had so much to say to Sangu about JM agency matters, but the latter ran off and said he would contact Junmo another time. Junmo couldn't help feeling a little saddened by how fast Sangu left and hoped he wouldn't forget the contract. Sangu arrived at his apartment at midnight and covered his face to prevent him from laughing. He felt the greatness of his skill since his clone made him. Afterwards, he called the second clone and named him number 2. The clones stood there then, facing each other, with Sangu excited to finally get into becoming a hunter. Junmo was bored by then and threw the cards into a seat. He wished the hunters would soon contact him. He looked out the window of his vehicle, where he was parked in front of the Heeshang Guild official building. There, someone was sipping coffee and looking through documents. He said Junmo just needed to settle the amount listed. Junmo was muddled by the total payment, because for him, the price of troll blood seemed really low. He called Junmo's name again and inquired whether it had been a while since he joined. Junmo confirmed it and was told that he should be quick-witted. He patted Junmo on the shoulder, telling him, yes. He knows that Junmo was full of righteousness, but he has already been told many times not to be too sensitive to guild business. Junmo, feeling unjust at that kind of thing, just chuckled, thinking, if he had known this was going to be hard, then he really should have kept his mouth shut. His phone rang. He picked up his phone and introduced himself as Kang Junmo, JM Agency. The caller introduced himself, mentioning he got a business card, so he would like to know something. They met at Starbucks coffee shop. Junmo lifted his arm and greeted Sangu with an apology for having kept him waiting. Sangu said it was no problem since he had just been there. Junmo suggested they order drinks. Sangu answered that would be good, and they ordered the drinks and sat. Then Junmo asked if Sangu really wanted to go into a safe hunting ground suitable for a newbie. Sangu replied yes. Junmo then asked what Sangu's skill was. He said it was cloning. Junmo thought of the cloning skill, which he had known but thought it may have created only illusions that would amount to nothing during a hunt. Sangu, on the other hand, was acting different in his sips of coffee. He claimed of having great skill while in a surprising attitude to what he was seeing. He then handed Junmo the contract to go through. He first suggested the slime hunting ground, which was safe, but had requirements to it, like face masks and protective clothes since slimes release poisonous gas. He mentioned horned rabbit hunting ground, which is safe too. Its rewards were pretty low and hard to catch. Junmo mentioned other low-class monsters like giant rats, but he said that he could guarantee safety only at those 2 recommended hunting grounds. Sangu liked both and the rate items he could sell. He thumped the document onto the table, declaring he would go ahead with the contract. Junmo was overjoyed and asked if Sangu could choose one of the hunting grounds since he liked them all. Sangu said no. He stamped the document. Junmo looked in surprise at another person stamping the contract document. It finally registered in his mind that there were 2 of him, and he looked again at Sangu. Junmo's eyes locked onto Sangu and his clone, with Junmo's face now mirroring a state of surprise. Sangu and his clone summoned him so as to allow the both of them to go hunting at the favorite hunting cove at once. Junmo welcomed the clone, who was in his true disguise as a ninja. Then he asked whether his got him the skill of cloning, and he said yes. Then turning to Junmo, He asked if he could demonstrate the skill to him. Then Junmo agreed. He gestured and some clones appeared. 4 identical clone illusions popped up, each drawing a sword to point at the central one, the original clone. Junmo's heart was racing at this fantasy that made it appear as if they had stabbed the original clone all at once. He let out a yell due to a start, but the clone comforted and asked him to hold on to his sound self. Then Junmo opened his eyes, and the numerous clones, as it went on, were nothing but illusions. They did not exist. The clone went on to inform him that the illusions could not even cause actual damage. It was but a skill that was supposed to attract other monsters somewhere else. Junmo laughed and embarrassingly confessed to watching the skill. He had seen the clone skill before. It was definitely an illusion skill, but he was still interested in the Sangu skill. The other Sangu examined the contract and found it valid. He sipped his coffee. Junmo was getting nervous because this was the first time ever that he saw that sort of skill. "Are those twins really looking the same?" he asked. Sangu laughed at the question. "Even though looking so, it was a real clone," he said. He said that he had one more clone and went to the fitness club. Junmo became surprised and asked if the clones can also build up the muscles. Sangu replied, "Even if my clone gets stronger, then I can be stronger." Junmo felt great about it. His skill was far away from an ordinary one. Sangu then changed the topic to the hunting grounds and asked whether it would be a problem if that same person were to enter other places at a certain time. Junmo replied that yes, it can be pretty problematic since entry is recorded. Sangu was disheartened but still assured that he would talk with the Hunter Association and do some adjustment. Sangu agreed, but he said that the case he could not apply the skill until the following evening, as it had the obligatory time of cooling down before being used. Junmo agreed and said that Sangu should meet him at the Hunter Center within these 2 days. Sangu had already stamped the contract, and Junmo was amazed to see it get stamped again. There were then 2 Sangus, after which he spread his hand to say he was excited to work with the 2 people. Sangu grinned and shook his hand. 2 days later, Sangu entered the Hunter Center and looked around. Junmo had called him and told him that he was pretty surprised he had entered early. Sangu replied that he came early just in case Junmo was waiting at the center for him, and asked if the association was inside the Hunter Center. Junmo said most facilities related to hunters were in it, and asked Sangu to follow. The center was full of hunters, and being 166th, Sangu was asked to head to counter E4. Desiring a duplicate hunting range access, the staff asked if his power was cloning. Well, Sangu had only one identity bracelet. He should wait, the staff said, since he was their first request for a duplicate access applied. The staff called in the chief so that pertinent papers can be searched. Sangu realized that this case of duplicate access was a rare one. The chief asked for the employee to go through the files. After some moments, he returned with the permit application and instructed Sangu to go to the civil service office and the equipment room for processing, saying that in the skill demonstration room, he could also take a permission test. It was crowded with papers. The surprised Junmo said he would handle the documents, so he took them from Sangu and asked him to enter the skill demonstration room. Sangu used his skill on a clone in the skill demonstration room. When it came out, it was naked, with him exclaimed by surprise and, likewise, his face and examiner's face reddened. An engineer altered the bracelet of Sangu, who let the clones get into the hunting fields with fingerprint scanning. It, therefore, created a way to enter and exit from another place at the same time. Sangu was overjoyed with the assistance given by the engineer. He expounded further that his ability was unprecedented, not in Korea, but in the whole world. Sangu thanked him and left with his clone. Sangu showed his bracelet to Junmo. Now that he completed the request for authorization, Junmo congratulated him. Junmo asked, "Going out to the hunting ground now?" Sangu answered, "Yes, I never have to work today." Junmo saw that Sangu put a mask on the clone and asked, "What was that for?" Sangu answered, "My clone driven a lot of interest from the people around me." With a smile, Juno noticed that he was scratching his head, something rather uncharacteristic of him. He knows that was Juno. "That is our guildmaster, Hisong-shin," looking down from above. Hyesung-shin returned a curious smile. He never expected the face of this person, and thought perhaps this might be the one, then realized it was Junmo. All of a sudden, he was being called Mr. Kang Juno, and here he falls, Guildmaster Hisong-shin, from the sky. He greeted, saying that it must have been a long time and that they meet at the Hunter Center. At the sight of the man, Sangu frowned and said he didn't know he was still chasing Hunter. Sangu could identify him to be the guild master of Hisong-shin Guild, Hisong-shin, and could barely believe that he leaped from at least a couple of floors above. Junmo was silent, clearly awkward at greeting the guild master. Hisong-shin smiled at Junmo's greeting and that he had addressed him as Sir. Hisong-shin continued to look to the person at his side, and Junmo said that person was with their company as a hunter. Hisong-shin saw Sangu's clothes and said he was a hunter. He continued on a really long-winded process, asking if Sangu was an F-rank hunter. Sangu was quiet. Guildmaster Hisong-shin suddenly laughed disappointingly, going ahead to mock Junmo as rough away from home and how Junmo, according to him, who used to supervise C and B-ranked hunters, has become a pathetic case. He then laughed like a madman, exclaiming he could not believe he was nursing an F-ranked hunter in a sweatshirt. Hee Sung-shin got on bad-mouthing Sangu, and Junmo got pretty angry that Mayang was doing that. But Sangu had to touch his shoulder to snap him out of it. Wiping his tears, Guildmaster Hee Sung-shin said that it seems the F-rank hunter had something to say. Sangu smiled at him, despite the ridiculing, and said that it was a high honor to meet also with the Guildmaster of the first-class country guild. His words were very dear to Guildmaster Hee Sung-shin, who told him that, in fact, he didn't have the eyes of an F-rank hunter, and then imitated, first in monopolizing dungeons, first in restricting hunting grounds, and first in terms of payment ratio. Guildmaster Hee Sung-shin thought that he had misunderstood, and the guildmaster of that greatest guild must have been joking to pretend to like him and call him a punk. Sangu smiled, saying he didn't know what to do, and then Guildmaster Hee Sung-shin broke his neck, saying he has some guts. Then it cut to a monstrous visage of him coming behind Sangu's back. Maybe we should check if your skill is as great as your guts, Sangu said in some surprise to how Hee Sung-shin came to his back so quick. Someone suddenly exclaimed, as the assistant addressed Guildmaster Hee Sung-shin, and then replied that he had found the party pooper. Fast pushed away, saying it was for now, then asked what his name was. Sangu answered that he should know what the answer was. Guildmaster Hee Sung-shin laughed at him, calling Sangu a funny person. It was reminded not to exit inside the association by the assistant to Guildmaster Hee Sung-shin. He said he knows, and after the interactions Junmo drove Sangu and his clone. Junmo thanked Sangu for what he did earlier. He could not stand there just like that, said Sangu. He asked if Junmo knows his relationship with the Guildmaster Hee Sung-shin. Sangu narrated. From some research, he came to know that the JM agency is related to this incident, but online there was scanty information regarding what really took place. One rumor was that Junmo had been kicked out of Hee Sung-shin Guild. Other than that, there was a comment raising doubt on people for not choosing JM agency, fearing JM agency, who is ready to attack Hee Sung-shin Guild. This was a shock to Sangu, wondering why he had done like this and why he had their agency. Sangu said it is the ratio of payment. Junmo laughed. Sangu added that he knew he could trust Junmo. If there is something I can't stand about guild industry, Junmo surprised with this very answer, Junmo thanked Sangu for saying so. The music was on inside the Tough Body gym. A hand was bleeding because of lifting weights, and the legs were buffed because of continuous workout. It appears that number one has been working out for quite a while. As a matter of fact, the gym owner went ahead to ask the female gymgoer if she thought he was dangerous pertaining to him. She replied that just by looking at him, to her, he looked really dangerous. She asked if he would be okay. He mentioned that he had tried to talk to him, but the reply was none. Number one heard his phone and put the weights away. The phone showed text him to come out after he'd finish his workout, wash up, and then go in front of the gym and wait out. Number one gulped the remainder of the water down. This time, he thought he was going to play hooky for the rest of the day, and the lady gym enthusiast really was elated that the gym owner finally came out. Slimes began to ooze out at the crevices in a cave. A hunter was dispatching slimes while gathering the goop in a can. The hunter was none other than Sangu. Junmo then asked him how it was. Sangu answered that the gas mask was a pain, and he felt like he was breathing through many face masks. He said it was natural because even though the slime hunting ground was safe, hunters didn't usually stay. Sangu understood the meaning and said it would be unbearable for this long. Again, Junmo said he could hunt to fill up the canister and then he could return it to the rented locker. But 6 hours will be more difficult to endure. And he added, some say a good gas mask and great gear perhaps might let pack it in for longer. Sangu was incredulous to that. He said he was quite certain that he would not stay long, let alone for 6 hours or 2. He then categorically added that probably it wasn't the same for number 2. Sangu wore his gas mask. The necessary gears were readied by number 2. His cheeks streamed tears as he wished number 2 the best of luck. He invited Junmo to the horned rabbit hunting ground, who was ready for that. He showed Junmo the number 1, but it didn't show him anything. The number 1 was waiting for Sangu to come to the gym. It was then that Junmo let out a screech from the tire of the car that sounded as if it were the end of the ride. Sangu slipped out through the window and told number 1 to go inside. They were driving along a busy street and Junmo asked Sangu why he introduced his clones as number 1 and 2. It's because they looked alike, Sangu said, and it would not be very feasible to give them fancy names. Junmo felt perhaps there was no requirement at all to name since they were after all clones, and Sangu rushed in with agreement. Then Sangu asked if he had to make some preparations to hunt the horned rabbit. To that, Junmo replied that he needn't worry about it since most of the equipment could be rented in the hunting ground. He added, however, that he should get his own equipment someday since rented equipment could be used only in the hunting ground, which was easier to take back. Then all of a sudden a noise from outside startled Sangu. He asked Junmo what the noise was. It meant they had already arrived. There was lots of military hardware around. Other hunters were all over the place. Many military people had been inspecting the place for security. Some were examining the hunters getting inside the entrance into the portal. The place seemed so wide. It was nothing like the slime hunting ground. We came upon it. Junmo confirmed this to be the large enough to have a monster break. Sangu had heard of this sort of thing before. It meant the portal somehow got cut off from the outside world, and when that happened, monsters went through, causing rampage in places surrounding the portal. Junmo explained that 5 years earlier, during a monster break, every monster of major kind was defeated, so there were mostly only F and E class monsters left, making everything a good hunting ground. Sangu put an expression on the noise, wondering who would listen to them. They went into the facility where a lot of stood together. Junmo pointed in one direction, of which he said, "He can rent the equipment there." A merchant dropped a crate on the ground, of which after being opened it had a rifle, night vision goggles, earplugs, and 400 rounds of a bullet. He murmured that its total cost was 7.1 million won. Sangu felt like crying because this money, to be paid, is a huge sum, the millions of won he had to. There are bullets, which are quite expensive. Most of the expenses will be from bullets, but that will change if you successfully hunt horned rabbits. For that, let me give you the price. The price of one horned rabbit is about 1 bucket of slime liquid. After saying that, Junmo then said to Sangu that their spot is on the 3rd floor of the building. He then realized that the clear area was also sectorized, even if it is inside the field. Horns directed to heaven. Junmo squeezed his ears. Harsh gunshots shocked Sangu. There were people shooting horned rabbits inside the field. One person was annoyed due to a miss and said to others to step away as far as possible from his front. Another one was bragging around with his catch. Junmo raised his forefinger to the mouth and pointed to the seat. Number 4. He guessed it was Sangu's. He wondered if Sangu was confident in his shooting skills. Sangu said that he has only missed 3 of the bullets during the hunter license shooting test, so he was sure. Feeling sorry for the horned rabbits after Junmo was aghast at his talent, he remembered them even with an ache in his teeth. Sangu inserted the earplugs and told the horned rabbits of their fateful situation about not being able to get away from his sight eagle eye ago. Junmo was breaking out into a cold sweat. He supposed it was a good thing everyone had earplugs. Sangu called out at the top of his voice whilst looking through his sight, and Junmo was sprinting as he too found a rabbit just about to bolt out in excitement. Sangu pointed the tip of the rabbit's ear and began taking careful aim, placing a finger cautiously on the trigger. He thought the hunt started. 3 hours later, Sangu was in very much pain. He couldn't shoot even one rabbit right. He was too tired. He said that it did not make any sense. His aiming was just fine, but the horned rabbits dodged the shots immediately after the trigger was pulled. He said even Agent Juno had gone away because he had no time. Sangu felt he couldn't recover even the money spent on bullets, so he wanted to know whether he was to call it a day. He asked number 1 whether, and to this, the latter replied in the affirmative. To number 1, Sangu pronounced to go hunt with the guns for the rabbits and gather them with the spear gun. Do not want narrations of a rabbit is there, instead send message 1 if you get them and just call me if you run out of your bullets. Before him, lying on the bed, a status window suddenly popped up. It showed his mana up 0.001 3 times in the window. Number 2 really kills a lot of slimes with efficiency, he thought. Sangu looked at his improvement stats, but remembered that it was the time Guildmaster Hisong Shin came from behind out of nowhere, scaring the hell out of him. He sighed. It won't be easy yet. Sangu yawned and imagined the horned rabbit giving him a bad finger. He had thought it was a total failure and that he caught the rabbit with horned, and he hadn't expected that it was going to turn out that tough. He had only wished that at least number 1 of them will be able to catch some horned rabbit. Just then, his mobile started beeping. Number 1 texted 1, meaning 46 unread messages from number 1. Buildings and business establishments filled the place all around. Junmo stared outside from his building. His phone beeped, and he answered the call. He was told that they have already reached the JM agency. Whether that is the one Hunter Sangu belongs, he asked the person on the other line, and Junmo confirmed in a yes. He was the slime hunting ground manager. It was at that point when he invited Junmo to come over and put an end to Hunter Sangu that Junmo began to question what the manager was talking about. It was at this point when the manager stated, "Sangu has been hunting for over 24 hours. He is out of his mind." It was at the utterance of that line when Junmo was utterly taken aback. By that time, Sangu was just waking up. He shifted the position just to see if number 1 had finally run out of bullets. Then he was flabbergasted by both the number of messages from number 1 and what number 1 had said. Meanwhile, Junmo had come to the slime hunting ground to see what the whole commotion was about. There were slime fluids in tanks. Junmo wondered if Sangu had managed to fill all the storage bins in 1 day only. They did not allow a break for number 2 to be allowed to go back to the portal, but number 2 insisted that he once again had to go and enter the portal. Junmo then shouted at Sangu that this was not the time for such things to happen. Sangu picked up the call, and Junmo shared the good news regarding the slime hunting ground. The Sangu clone had filled all the storage bins in 1 day, and they were about to call the monster corpse cleaner. He asked Sangu to order number 2 to stop hunting. Sangu was very elated with the news and asked if they could also dispatch cleaners to Ujangsan. This made Junmo ask what he meant. Sangu told him there was a heap of horned rabbits at the hunting ground, and he even thought that the corpses are blocking the way. In the hunting ground, Mad big number of humans were crowding all piles of horned rabbit corpses. Some even could not count the number of the corpses and thought it was totally freaking unbelievable. A man took a video of those horned rabbit corpses and told the group of friends that he shot it, and nobody would find it. They thought Sangu was hunting all the horned rabbits alone. An agent praised Sangu's ability to hunt and about to lend him a business card. It was on the business card of the Brown Bear Guild that told of his identity. Back to the agent, he asked whether Sangu was already a member of a guild. The question was treated with silence from number 1. Since he was ignored, the operative held back, not wanting the other agent to laugh over him. They all tried talking to number 1 and he just never answered. They all concluded that all the talkers that spoke to number 1 all came from big guilds, and one even claimed he was sure number 1 would have spoken a word or two. Another one corrected him saying number 1 did not mutter any words. It was at that time Sangu threw another ammo case just in front of number 1, for him to use it. He told number 1 those are extra bullets, so he told him not to stop hunting. He told number 1 the corpses would be his responsibility if he was to arrive. Number 1 agreed. He patted number 1 on the shoulder and commended that he had done a good job. Number 1 was so excited for such commendation from Sangu. Then, he loads the gun mags. It includes the surprise to note that he started to hunt. The people told to stay still and watched how was he going to do it. He left from the area, and the people wanted to record how he hunted. The horned rabbits came to be hunted then. Sangu thought that he might have underestimated what the clones were capable of, but he knows the clones are gaining 50% of his stats. He thought they could do only 50% of what he could do in a simplistic sense, but he could see they got a machine's performance in executing missions, ability to make decisions without delay, and making lightning decisions and focusing. He was snapped out of his reverie with the student calling for his attention, and he asked him what he was thinking about. She said. He then handed the paper to her, saying he had finished checking and assured her that she was indeed doing better than before. She responded with a recount of how people used to tell her that she could do better if she tried, and then again asked him what he was thinking. Sangu told her that he had just stepped out and visited a hunting ground. It had gone relatively better than expected. She got very surprised when Sangu spoke, so she asked if he was a hunter. He asked if he had not said so, to which she answered that she didn't know. The billowing all of a sudden asked if he knew the hunter she had seen on her phone. Since people were so noisy, talking about a person that made her ask who it was, she said it is God of Ujungsan Eagle Eye, and Sangu spat the water in his mouth. He feigned innocence. She asked if she didn't know him because everyone was crazy about the man in Hunter Wiki. She said that he hunted more than 200 rabbits before they recorded the video. She added that was more than enough for a new record. Haeyeon said that he did not respond to the people's questions about his name, so to the people there, he simply looked fresh and cool. Because of that too, the news was hot at the time. The people had been asking him to whom IC stands for. The cameraman asked who he was, and number 1 replied, Ujungsan Eagle Eye. Then the cameraman asked what that meant. That had made Sangu very embarrassed. She said that the person is cool, and again added that she is a real dreamer because she dreams of being a hunter. Sangu asked if waking up will be a part of her hunter dream, and she confirmed this, adding that she managed to get a license but was a bit afraid to come to the field hunting. Haeyeon make attempts to play shy, wanting to be able to talk to Sangu. She told him that in the case she aced the test excellently, he should take her to the hunting grounds just once. Sangu was quick to respond that it was not hard, and in the case she made it to the university, he would take her. She asked him whether he was serious, and he said he too knew where the safe hunting fields were. She asked him to promise further. Sangu smiled, and with Haeyeon they pinky promised that he can't change his mind. She swore that only he would keep doing what he had been doing, working twice as hard as she does, and definitely she could get into Gyeongguk University, to which she replied positively, and said that yes, she could get into the Gyeongguk University. Mrs. Deokyeol saw the guy and asked Sangu if it was fine, and he answered that it was fine. She asked about Haeyeon, and Sangu said that even though he was afraid, Haeyeon is very talented, so there is nothing for her to be worried about. This time, Haeyeon was in her room and listened. Then she felt so grateful to hear those words. Sangu told Mrs. Deokyeol he was going. She told him he should eat first before going. He politely said no, saying he got to be in another place. Haeyeon listened to this one, and she blushed. She now jumped to her bed and hugged her stuffed toy. She was treated to his appointment with Sangu and blessed for the flow they had in their conversation. He felt grateful too that he was a hunter. She can just flick of the wrist produce a ball of light, and she initially had felt she did not like Sangu as he was one of the many people by her father. She had realized he was a nice, good teacher. She pinched his toy feeling happy that to tell honestly, he was handsome too. After she had thought it over in a few minutes of exhausting thinking, she had gasped a sigh and sat down to study in a quite serious mood. Meanwhile, Sangu had gone to Ujungsan Field. He had gone upstairs and wondered if the picking up of the corpses was all over at first. Junmo discovered him and called his name. That made him in turn recognize that Junmo was also among the people around there. In this regard, Junmo told him that he must check up on how far it was with the collection. Where did Sangu say he had been? Sangu replied that he had been doing a tutoring job. Junmo then added that he had called at many hunting grounds before for the collection of teams. but that was the first time he had ever called such a large number of corpses for the corpse-horned rabbits team. In all, 352 horned rabbit corpses explained the number of the people present together. "Has Sangu checked the settlement of the troops that I sent?" Junmo asked. Sangu exclaimed, surprised. He did not check it. Not even a single notification was made. He looked at his cell phone from a distance. The balance in the deposit is 32 million won from JM Agency. He was surprised that it was such a huge money sent to him. Sangu asked Junmo if that large sum was actually the reward he would get. "It's just that Sangu's hunting abilities apparently were good for his F-class, so I changed the settlement rate to 83% while I even applied for the E-class hunters from the beginning." Sangu thanked Junmo for that, but he still didn't think of himself as an E-class hunter. Then some person came up to them. He asked the question to Junmo that about being bad number one's manager, shouting him a son of gun. He pointed him that he is number one, and Junmo said yes, asking the one that he was. The one asked Junmo with what he thought, telling him that he looking on a prey-stalking hunter whose prey got stolen by him. Someone went on to say that all the game he had shot at with the horned rabbits was gone with number one, and he spoiled his hunt. He then went on to say that he thought they will have to pay for that to Junmo, lost with words and whispered towards Sangu that they seemed to have taken the wrong spot. He says he did not know a person like that existed. For this reason, Sangu proceeded to work out a plan at that time. He said what and how since Junmo told him so, and the latter queried him on what and how he would do. He asked what the two people were whispering between them and said that he was a man of conscience. He asked them to be good and fork over 10% of the total settlement fee. Sangu laughed at the man, so he asked if he had thought it was a joke. Sangu answered him not to worry since his lookalike wouldn't be in the area for about a few coming days. He asked Junmo if they should leave the place. The man shouted again, stating that he hadn't finished his statement, and again asked where they were headed. Then, Junmo whispered in Sangu's ears, asking him where they were really headed. Sangu answered that they could go near the coffee shop. He was so much angry that he turned the body, yelling for not to be ignored. He was trying to punch Sangu, but Sangu said a command to number one using his thought. Then he gives the punch to the face of number one. The person shocked that number one got the punch and acted he missed giving a punch away so hard. Number one hits on several containers from the attack and then the wall. There was even blood from the punch that the man made. He even grew nervous and asked that he had not hit him that hard. Sangu bellowed that what the man did was brutal, revealing that he was experiencing a video capturing all that had happened. It was an abuse in the holy hunting ground. Further adding how one would not just let the situation pass if it were to go out. To that, Junmo just nodded, agreed, saying how people had their eyes glued to the person, and around himself, realized what a mess it would be if the video is uploaded on the Hunter web. And then the person got so nervous, Sangu said, patting his shoulder if it was right. He then told whoever if it was cool, let them be on their way. That guy crushed his teeth in anger, and thought afterward. After that, both Sangu and Junmo entered into the coffee shop. He said it was because he had thought the hunter who picked a fight with them was the person amongst the Hong Guild members. Sangu said he didn't know the person the hunter was. Junmo said that since Hong was such a large guild, there were all manner of people crammed in it. He then asked Sangu how he knew that person was from the Hong Guild. Junmo answered that, since the person had come before him to the hunting ground to collect, the hunter was keeping his eyes on him all the time. Worried, Junmo thought it might be some trick of the Hong Guild in one way or the other, so Junmo next guessed it might be for revenge. He further added that maybe they did, thinking his clone was another hunter who made a contract. As embarrassing as it is to say, the hunters taken by the JM agency are not treated differently than at any other time. He also further added that it is embarrassing to say that JM agency hunters didn't have much survival since they just left. There were only a few F-class hunters left. He was one of them, and he had said he could not promise that the Hong Guild wasn't coming. Sangu had told him he wouldn't give himself second thoughts on the choice since he knew the situation perfectly, and yet did decide to join, which made him answer not to worry about it. Junmo seemed to be concerning, and Sangu said not to let those people oppress them anymore. Sangu told that revealing his plans to be extremely strong in no time, he has been boasting a lot, so Junmo felt relaxed after knowing it. Then, he asked what Junmo felt regarding his plan. In reply, Junmo said that his situation never looked at itself that way. "Is 2 in the afternoon the next day okay with you?" Junmo asked. To that, Sangu responded in the positive. With that out of the way, they went on to the details of exactly where it was that they would meet in front of the hunter's market. The hunter market never stopped selling weapons, shields, and other hunting accessories. One fine day, this profession was invaded by another new type of departmental store that had everything a hunter would ever need and squeezed most of it out. Sangu was trying on an armor, and according to the dealer, he said that the armor is made of titanium. Therefore, if one wears it, he would be entirely protected from E-class monsters. Junmo asked Sangu what his thoughts were, and Sangu replied that he likes it since it is comfortable, very light. He also purchased a weapon and a knife with the aim of acquiring the skills to use the guns, after which he thought it great enough for him. Afterwards, Sangu asked the dealer whether he could have 2 more sets of armor like he was wearing, and he was told that they can provide him. The equipment he had bought was put inside briefcases. He also asked if he needed some skills. He said yes. Was he familiar with the skill Junmo had asked? And Sangu said yes, though he wasn't sure they would find it there. Both agreed to go to the shop with many orbs and great varieties of skills. Junmo started searching through the orbs with skills, while Sangu was looking around for something. He said that he wasn't there for whatever it was that he was looking for. The name of the skill was familiar. It allowed the hunters to share their senses and vision with their summons and pets. Actually, the cost surprised Sangu, for it cost 129,901 He was overwhelmed by the price that he saw. Sangu told Junmo that he guessed it was time to lay another layer of relationship on the first, and Junmo instantly understood what Sangu wanted in advance payment. With tearful eyes, Junmo told him it was all okay and that he thought he could lend him 50 million won at once. Sangu thanked him and thought he could just handle the rest of the money in installments. He promised Junmo not to be so worried with the fact that the money, if he succeeded in his plan, could earn back in no time. Sangu bought the skill along with the weapons he had bought earlier. Sangu looked at the instructions to find out how it would function. He went through and read that he was supposed to keep pouring mana in the skill ball. For users who could not control mana, they had to turn on the ball while keeping it in contact with their body, and since he did not know how to control mana, he wondered maybe the remote was the on button. He reached out and touched the orb of the skill. He spun it with his remote-carrying hand, then pressed the button on the remote. The light discharged out at an insane speed, quickly overtaking Sangu. It filled the room, remaining there for a moment, before dissipating. The window with his status appeared once again. In it was the familiar skill. It allowed him to share senses with the subject of his choice. He felt the light emanate from the orb, and with that, he knew his skill ball was gone. He clenched his fist as he felt it was good for the skill to be at the ready. Sangu then summoned number 1 and number 2. Both of them summoned and donned their armor that Sangu had bought earlier from the merchant. He told them that they would go, as he had said. He had an idea to get stronger quickly. Sangu had asked earlier in the week what Junmo thought the result of the hunting trip would be. Junmo answered that it went super great, and he never had such results in his imagination. Junmo stated that they would never have thought such stamina, endurance, and reaction time as a result. This time, even his clones had only half the stats, yet they caught more than 300 horned rabbits. Even in the earlier incident, it was Sangu who had ordered number 1 to take the hunter's attack and overact to the best of his abilities. It wasn't easy timing it perfectly like that, and fearlessly shoving one's face into a hunter's fist. Sangu added, he really felt he could have beaten that hunter if he wanted to. Junmo asked him, then he was saying it. It is. With low stats, they have so much more exquisite ability to control the body. He replied it was so, and he would use that to his advantage. He then asked how Sangu was going to do that. To which Sangu replied that first he needed 2 various places, grounds on which to practice long-range and close-range madness. Sangu came to some gym, and someone approached him, inquiring if he was there to register. He was driven to a shooting range when the person asked him whether he came for clay target shooting, and that he would prepare it immediately. The 2 clones were sent to the 2 places when Sangu stated that he would train the clones really hard until they reached their limit. The man at the firing range was surprised that Sangu asked to have a gun. The man at the gym was surprised that Sangu asked to spar right from the first round. The gym instructor showed Sangu that all he had to do was hit it the way he did. He has to strike the stick so his sparring partner drops it. He also asked whether Sangu really wanted to start sparring right away. The shooting range instructor did wonder if Sangu knew what clay shooting really meant, since this was the purpose for which they would use a shotgun, and then he asked Sangu once again whether really he wanted a pistol. Both his clones answered affirmatively. He was asked Sangu to get ready. He was told that he had been given a live pistol to hold, not one whose pieces were disassembled so it could be used for practice. Both teachers were teaching the 2 clones one at a time consecutively, and the 2 clones were taught. In the case of one of the clones was supposed to fight it out while the other clone was supposed to have a practice shooting. The sparring class resulted in one clone winning over the enemy outside because of the outsmarting techniques, and the other clone hit the required target in practice. Both of the different instructors were surprised from the abilities of the Sangu's clones. Sangu had told Junmo several tries back that he needed the familiar skill. Junmo had been surprised by the familiar skill, and asked Sangu if it was the skill for sharing his vision with his pet, and what he would do with that. Sangu said it was not only concerning his sight, even the senses were connected, and it was important that smell, touch, and all sensations should follow. Think about it. Now imagine, me using the skill while my clones are sparring or practice shooting, he added, and Sangu sighed and then begins to concentrate. He willed his familiar skill to activate, and then he was enshrouded by light. He added that he felt everything, his clone's feelings when he fought in a spar match, where he was in the spar, how the joints bent, and the balance within the body. He could also feel the flow of the strength and movements of the muscles, blood-curdling. Even the breathing of another clone he had was felt during the shooting practice and setting aim and direction of his sight. Sangu also felt the recoil control of the gun and all the other movements of his clones, and he said that he could have all of it. Everything his clones did, he felt the same as they did. Therefore, he was happy about going through whatever his clones were experiencing. From then on, he felt that he was undergoing the same feeling as the clone. Missing the baton with air pressure, smelling gunpowder, the recoil force. What else? Tiredness. He knew he hadn't moved at all, and it was all done by his clones. He was just sharing their senses. Since he experienced the movement of clones with the same exact body, he felt he could mimic movements right away. Next to him, a status window popped up, showing increases to strength and reaction time. He felt it was good enough and decided to do a sparring and shooting for the day. He wanted to check first on number 1 to see who he was fighting this time around. He began to focus, this time casting his familiar ability. Sangu felt the atmosphere from his clone, number 1, who was going to spar with another. It was the style of a strong person. Sangu himself felt that the opponent had the face of a strong man. People were in awe that their coach was personally going to spar with his clone. Another person stated that might be because Sukai had lost a sparring to him. They both started in a battle stance. His clone hit his opponent's baton, and with that, he easily sidestepped the attacks, throwing an overhead to his sticks. It is at this very point that Sangu realized his clone's attacks were inexperienced, and the coach surely did not have an idea about handling the batons. Yet he felt oddly strange that the defense of his clone was different. It seemed like he read the coach's moves since he could perfectly dodge his movements. He was just about to attack, smashing the baton of number 1 in hope of overpowering him, but number 1 defended properly, shaking as he parried the attack, which surprised the coach. Then it was the turn of number 1 to have a go and smash his sticks against the coach. The coach was in a shock from the strength of the attack and turned to quick retaliation. The coach tried attacking back, but number 1 was quick to dodge. The people in the gym were in astonishment at what had happened. No sooner this happened than number 1 returned an attack. Oh, the coach was busied with the attack. Though he has the opportunity to defend his back awaiting the next attack from number 1. Number 1 was all in full readiness of the next attack. The coach smiled as though he was aware of the attack to befall him again. He climbed through the wall to avoid an attack from number 1, which surprised Sangu and number 1. During the attack, the people were proud to see their coach also being a human and not an ordinary man to the coach, while they thought it was a quite near hit for him. On the other hand, Sangu was suffering from the pain on his wrist side, which was hurt by the attack of the coach. While he thought it was a dangerous move, the coach asked him if he wanted to continue. When he saw Sangu silent, he asked number 1 if he was okay. So number 1 followed what the coach did. He jumped through the wall, surprised everybody, most especially the coach. Sangu was taken aback by the action of number 1 in continuing the pole vault. He then dropped himself to the ground, surprised the coach as well. He was told by number 1 that he wanted a rematch. The coach just grinned and accepted that. Sangu claimed that was fine and wanted to reshape to number 2. He then contacted the number 2 senses. The clay was arrogant person's shots who asked a person if she saw what he does. The girl answered she did and he was so cool. However, Sangu decided not to say anything, but it shows that number 2 was also firing at the clay objects of the occupant beside him. However, he just waved his hand as he wants to focus to hit. The occupant asked the instructor to bring more as he wants to secure the highest score, and he laughed gregariously. Another clay had been catapulted by the machine. Sangu tried to memorize how number 2 moved stable upper body. A thought came into his mind. Don't move the body, and he was only to turn in the clay's direction of the suspected trajectory. As the aim matched with the suspected trajectory, his shot hit the target, and the clay was destroyed. Smoke came out of the barrel of the gun. He tried to remember every little detail that he had experienced. He stared at the broken clay, thinking that he needed all the experience his clone had been through to enter his head. His body was in that state where he felt everything his 2 clones' experiences. Sangu deactivated his familiar skill and said that switching between number 1 and number 2 was really tiresome. All of a sudden he felt dizzy as if he were in the center of a hurricane. He noticed that his mana was all out and he was feeling giddy, hence he had to rest. He sat on the bench and noted what the clones were doing. It was crazy beyond the super level. Of course, they were probably never thinking, and fear never entered the picture. They moved all they had to. Having this knowledge, Sangu decided that he would go with his clone next time, as he is curious to test what would happen if he tries it himself. There was sound for running. The one recognized Sangu, who was sitting on the bench. She addressed Sangu as a teacher, and that was what drew his attention to her. Then he remembered the person as Heian. He asked her what she was doing there in that place late in the evening, and she responded that she is studying at the library. Sangu teased her, replied asking her if she lies and does not even bat her eyelids. But she told him that she is really telling the truth, and that she has already her homework too. Nasima said there was this man smoking and asked if it was the man somebody was talking about. It sounded like the man in the horned rabbit hunting ground who had bullied him was calling up some people getting some payback. The big guy asked if that was him. It turns out the hunter is after Kang Junmo in the horned rabbit hunting ground. There is someone else reproaching the hunter, letting Junmo get away. He apologizes, saying that it was only an attempt to threat Junmo a little, but he doesn't know that what he has said is recorded by someone. Then he asked the other on the line if the assault was filmed. He heard a gasp from the caller, who only told him that he would realize it on his own. He was to forget it, that he wasn't to say anything. He was to shut up, period, and stay away from Ujangsan Field. He was also not to worry because he had nothing to do with the highest young guild. Before he had even finished hanging up, that caller told him he was in fault and called him a street bully. He flung his phone down in anger, uttering swear words while doing so. He stomped on his phone several times while yelling questions, asking if they knew who they were messing with. He was heard by someone who asked what he was mad about. The person was Gunseok. He smiled at him to ask what. He laughed at the story of the hunter. He asked if he did nothing. He just let them go. He said he was such a punk for knowing this would happen if he was that happy to join a country #1 guild. He said sorry to him, and asked Hunam if the job was still up for grabs since guild told him not to go near the Ujangsan Field. He told him he was such a punk, very straightforward. He then asked Changwon if he had something, and Changwon told him yes, he had some part-time jobs. He was just about to ask him in detail when he saw Sanggu and Heian from afar. Heian was talking with Sanggu, so the hunter told Hunam it's him, the one who recorded the video. Hunam asked him, "Are you sure?" And the hunter said, "I'm sure. I'm pretty sure," as he rushed to the position of Sanggu while he was telling to him to calm down. Hunam asked whether he was sure that the man he was narrating was him, and the hunter was containing his anger. "What is your business in the place?" Heian asked again, and he said he was just doing some exercises. Then, a shrilling voice yelled at them, calling his attention. He told Sanggu that he heard the hunter saying his brother owed him something. They started approaching where they were. He asked Heian who those people were, but Sanggu told her he didn't know. That hunter was so mad by looking at him. He again commanded with his mind #1 and 2. Sanggu asked if he could help them. He became so pissed, yelling away as if he didn't know anything, but Hunam stopped him, telling him to wait a second. He then asked Sanggu if he heard right, whether he had some video where their brother made the mistake out of excitement. Ham told him to delete the video, and they would let him go peacefully. Did he mean that they would let him go if he deletes the next video? To this, the hunter was dead against it. Meanwhile, Hunam told him it was okay and he himself would not do tiresome work, but Sanggu stopped his hand. He asked if there was a guarantee that if he deleted the video, they would set him free. Ham smiled, saying he now understood Sanggu. He told him that, according to his judgment, Sanggu did not appear stupid, and that he was right not to set him free. He added that Sanggu was not bright enough to erase it right after he took it, to which he said didn't make much difference from his present situation. Sanggu whispered back to Heian to look for the right time and run. He told them that in case there is a difference, they wouldn't get out of there. Meanwhile, Hunam was readying his fist. Sanggu thought probably he never expected to get into tight corners so soon. He told them that he was going to beat them all. Ham laughed at him, telling him what confidence he exudes. He then gave an order to the hunter and his company to give Sanggu a good measure of beating, as he shouted to be informed that Sanggu was going to beg him to allow him erase the video after what he would do to him. He attempted hitting him with a blow. The other struck his head using an elbow. A blow hit followed the attack. However, Sanggu could still manage to defend it on his person. Then, the other guy hit him again on the head using an elbow. Heian was already teary-eyed with what she saw. Sanggu fell to the ground, spitting blood as he thought that it did not work out well in the first fight. Then, Heian stood in front of Sanggu. She conjured a ball of flame. She warned them to step back. Sanggu tried to stand and called her name. He was in a shock as her body was shaking in fear. The hunter, surprised that she turned out to be awakened also, other found it very annoying. Ham smacked their two heads. He asked them how a high school girl scared them. They asked him what would happen if they didn't back off. She asked her what she would do if he continued heading for her. She placed the fireball in the direction of the couple, warning them not to come close. But he insisted on doing so. She was scared of him, so she placed the fireball in his way. He stood no chance but to receive the attack. Directly she attacked him. The hunter was calling for his name as Hunam took his attack. Remained the thinking smoke from the charged. Almost Hunam slapped Hunam, telling her to grow up. He told her that the awakened from the very first instance were more considerate than the stones rolling on the streets, so she can't brag about it. It was interceded by Sanggu as he protected Heian from an attack. "That has never been done," yet said Sanggu, and he cursed him. Then a return punch in the face. Opened his fist. Heian surprised at the sight that she saw. He looked so grim and angry. What attacked the face made Sanggu touch his cheek, a move which made the other two men concerned. The hunter called Sanggu a bastard and went to attack him once more. Sanggu then tried to remember the feeling when he did that familiar skill. Realization hits that what he saw is not a stick like it was earlier. By watching the attack of the hunter, he had observed that as one just watches the hunter's shoulder, he will have a head start to avoid the attack. He managed to dodge the attack and reiterated that to strike doesn't mean just swinging of arms to and fro. It was time. Sanggu readied himself as he steeled for counterattacks from the hunter. He took a stance, much as he had seen before, and copied, gathering his strength from waist to arm as he attacked. It connected with the hunter square on the chin, and it was hard enough that he blew clean away. To his surprise, the other man was readying an attack on him as well. Sanggu thought that he couldn't dodge, that it would hit him. The attack of the man had hit his face, but Sangu managed to punch him back in the stomach. Sangu was huffing while the man was knocked down. He then looked at his opponent, catching breath. Hunam then wiped his face and told Sangu that he could now fight back. Hunam said that he was reluctant to beat a person who could not even swing his fist. Sangu readied himself, but the ache from earlier when they had fought was still there. It was now that he realized he could take it back then. But if this was too strong, he guessed his skill must belong to a muscle strength enhancement skill. He realized that he must not let Hunam hit him. Hunam dashed to where he was and screamed he is coming. Sangu was able to dodge the attack and counter with a strike below his chin. He then sent another attack to his face. Ham was getting pissed off with the attacks Sangu was giving him and called him little bastard. Ham then quickly launched himself at Sangu. Sangu moved and socked him again in the face, thinking that he should sock him hard enough to inflict some damage. Ham tried to hit back, cursing at Sangu, but Sangu was able to sock him again below his face. One of them said that he was worried that Hunam gets beaten up. Sangu suddenly felt like there was something wrong with Hunam. Hunam had been getting tougher and tougher as he was being attacked. Sangu saw his hand start to leak mana. Hunam was going to fight back and said Sangu was dead. Sangu knew this was a big move, and he needs to dodge it. But the hunter held his foot. Sangu became worried that he could not move, and then the hunter smiled at him. Sangu realized that Hunam's attack would hit him since he could not move away. The attack came to rest on Sangu's stomach, blowing him away. The attack damaged him badly, hence he vomited. Heian screamed, "No," as she witnessed Sangu getting attacked. His back hit a pillar as he was trying to catch breath, holding his stomach. He could hardly breathe as Hunam laughed, asking if he liked it. Sangu was trying so hard to breathe. Then he saw Hunam attempting to attack him once again, and he said that it was over. The attack to Hunam was then interrupted. There was smoke everywhere, even coming out from his mouth. Then suddenly Sangu turned and got surprised with the outcome. It turned out it was Heian who prevented him from getting attacked by Hunam. The hunter and his friend were both furious, and they scolded Heian for what she had done. They both rushed toward her at the same moment, yelling at her that she should have run. But fortunately, enough. Number 2 and Number 1 were able to make it in time and save Heian by beating up the two enemies. It surprised Heian with regards to the events that unfolded. Sangu's clones could protect Heian. Ham turned his back and was not quite clear what had taken place. At this time, Sangu stood up. He called for Hunam's attention. Sangu wiped out the blood over his mouth and told Hunam that finally, he could breathe. Sangu yelled in annoyance, seeing Sangu being arrogant. Sangu moved fast. He jumped and climbed up to the pillar behind his back. He then came near to Hunam's face and thanked him for the test of real battle experience. Sangu kicked Hunam in the face that instantaneously blew him. Sangu was catching breath since he fought a very great opponent. Meanwhile, Hunam was knocked out cold. The other companions of Hunam were knocked out also by Sangu's clones. A status window suddenly popped up, showing that multiple statuses of Sangu had increased and gained muscle strength. Then it disappeared, replaced by another status window. The status window showed that Sangu's clone skill had leveled up temporarily, now making his clone skill level 3, but still on trial. Sangu laughed as details of his status showed in the status window. He fainted instantly and said that was what he got. Heian called for him as his clones rushed to his side. It was midnight at the apartment building as Sangu was asking Heian why she stayed instead of running since she had the time. Heian told him she doesn't think that was what he wanted to tell her. Sangu answered it was true, but he told her what she did is still dangerous. Heian shifted the topic and told him that she could not believe that the famous rookie hunter was just a clone. Back when he almost passed out, she recognizes the other person who rushed to Sangu as Mount and Eagle Eye. Sangu coughed and told her not to go about telling people, to which she asked if he didn't want to be famous. Sangu answered that the same thing might happen again. Heian answered, saying she understands and would keep her mouth shut. As they finally arrived at the apartment house of Heian, Sangu asked if that was her house, to which she responded in the affirmative, disappointed. She asked Sangu whether her hand was alright and whether she could still hold a pen using it.